It's the beginning of a new month, and that means it is time for your piping hot monthly Bitcoin digest. It is the last monthly digest of 2024, but the first digest in which we can say Bitcoin is above 100,000 fiat USD units, the fiat exchange rate of Bitcoin. And what a milestone that is. It has been nearly an entire 4 years since the very first post around the laser eye until 100K meme. And even longer than that I've been doing this channel. So it's been a fun journey. Congrats to all of you that have been hodling along the way. Your increased purchasing power is something you should indeed celebrate. That is good for you, for your families. And for those that are newer, welcome to the journey as well. Today, we're going to go through some of the different adoption-related news that everyone should be aware of and thinking about because it impacts your ability to acquire sats, to acquire Bitcoin. And we're going to talk about what we might see heading into 2025. And we'll also talk about why not everything may be sunshine and rainbows. Let's jump in. I'm excited to share my company Joltz has partnered up with Thunder Funder to democratize investing in awesome Bitcoin startups. Now live on thunderfunder.com, where anyone can invest and own a real piece of Joltz. This video is made possible by Bitcoin Trading Cards, and I am pumped to have them as the first sponsor on my channel. I met Aladdin and the team back at Pacific Bitcoin 2022, and I'm not gonna lie, at the time I thought, okay, cool, a quirky little Bitcoin project, but little could I have imagined at the time how this project would capture imaginations. I've personally used these to orange pill people that I care about in my life. The art is stunning and features Bitcoin artists all around the world. You get high quality Bitcoin education on topics like economics and freedom as part of that, which makes this, as you can imagine, a really special project for me. And I'm not gonna lie, it makes you want to collect these. The community behind this is also truly insane. And I think they have a real shot at bringing Bitcoin to the mainstream. So if you're curious to check them out, head over to btc-tc.com where you can find the different series they've launched. And hey, if you do end up snagging some cards, you'll also get some Bitcoin rewards back on your purchase, powered by Joltz. Here's to ripping packs and stacking sats. Okay, so let's just take stock of the different adoption-related pieces that are working together at this moment. Obviously, the big catalyst for the recent run-up was the election win in the US by Donald Trump, who has been a vocal supporter and advocate for Bitcoin and the broader industry. Obviously, we shouldn't take any politician at face value. They're making campaign promises, but that is arguably more favorable than the opposing party who directly went after the industry and tried to kill it, as we will discuss. And so, as I have long covered on this channel, and by the way, this whole year, even when we saw some of the ETF run up earlier this year, I said, look, the real fireworks are not going to start until Q4. And lo and behold, that's exactly what happened, because following the halving every 4 years, you've sort of set the stage for big price appreciation. And really what you need to ignite that pile of dry leaves is some sort of a catalyst, in this case, the Donald Trump election victory. And all the while, the Bitcoin spot ETFs in the US have been gobbling up more and more and more Bitcoin. As Eric points out, this is literally 5x faster growth than any ETF that's ever existed. The supply of Bitcoin represented by these ETFs is now collectively greater than Satoshi's 1.1 million. We could see that breakdown of what that looks like across the different providers. But that's an insane milestone, right? That I really think happened quicker than anyone would have expected, even having recognized how quickly out of the gate these ETFs came early in the year when they were launched. And so you have that machine cranking away. You have Charles Schwab coming out with a $500K to $1 million Bitcoin prediction. If you don't have at least 10% in your portfolio, you are at risk of falling behind. And again, we could argue about whether it's a good thing or not that Bitcoin is in some ways becoming institutionalized. It's certainly good for number go up and for your purchasing power as an individual, but there's definitely some potential risks and different dynamics. I recently did a whole video on Bitcoin consensus that I would encourage you to check out. I'll come back to that later in this video as well. But nonetheless, you have this just machine cranking, gobbling up Bitcoin. In terms of corporations adopting Bitcoin, it is getting pretty silly at this point. MicroStrategy is just buying ungodly amounts of Bitcoin through these convertible note offerings. If you'd be interested to understand how those mechanics work, let me know in the comments down below. I'd be happy to do a video on it. However, there are a lot of great articles and videos out there that explain how this is working, basically how MicroStrategy is offering this convertible note, i.e. borrowing money to buy Bitcoin and sort of rinsing and repeating. There's an interesting interview by Markets with Madison that is the most in-depth I've seen, at least, of Michael Saylor going into this idea and strategy. And not surprisingly, you now have a bevy of other companies that are starting to adopt their own strategies. You have Semler Scientific, Rumble announced their Bitcoin treasury strategy, Thumbs Up, Accurix Pharmaceuticals, Genius Group. Again, some of these are small, some of these are bigger, but the chorus is now really growing in a way in which I think a lot of people thought would happen following MicroStrategy adopting the strategy way back in 2020. But again, what a lot of people fail to realize is that corporations move very slow, right? There are governance layers to all of this. Speaking of that, Microsoft has their upcoming shareholder vote on Tuesday. So this video should probably come out on Monday. So it'll be interesting. That news may come out by the time you even watch this video. Guess who's one of Microsoft's biggest shareholders? BlackRock. Like, do you see where this is going? So that'll be interesting to see. Arguably, an even more interesting dynamic is happening a level above all of that, at the nation state level, right? All this talk about a Bitcoin strategic reserve for the US or for other countries, whatever. As a reminder, Senator Loomis in the US is a politician that proposed a bill this past summer. And it was interesting in some ways. It definitely got some form of bipartisan support, but not kind of quite the level to advance it in a material way. But now with the Trump victory, that idea is being resurfaced and is rapidly gaining in its adoption. Basically, this bill would seek to have the U.S. buy up to essentially 5% of the total supply of Bitcoin, so about a million Bitcoin or so over time. I think maybe over 5 years or something. Don't quote me on the details there. And note that that is different than merely keeping the Bitcoin that the U.S. government has confiscated from entities like Silk Road and others. That would be the U.S. actively buying Bitcoin. And where this is starting to get really, really interesting is around the whole discussion of the BRICS and gold, Bitcoin as this, replacement for that. So basically what's happening is for a long time now, the BRICS, so Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, and that the list has grown significantly more as well, UAE. All of these entities are looking to reduce their reliance on the US dollar. Can and has been weaponized. And so people like Luke Grahman cover this dynamic extremely well of how these nations are increasingly settling in currencies other than the US dollar and then are settling their kind of ultimate trade surpluses in gold. The BRICS are trying to move away from the dominance of the dollar towards what appears to be, by all evidence, gold. And so it's opened up this really interesting narrative that Saylor and others are now talking about, which is, hey, if the US perceives these other countries as a threat or whatever, obviously there's the well-known tensions between the US and the likes of China and Russia, could the US not sort of rug pull those countries in terms of gold? And so what that would look like is the US selling its gold. Who knows how much gold the US still has in Fort Knox? No one really knows. But let's assume that they did have a lot of gold, right? They could sell gold, buy a huge fat stack of Bitcoin, and in doing that, essentially demonetize or take away the monetary premium that's attached to gold. And then you've essentially kicked off this new game theory with Bitcoin, where as that rises, you're now benefiting, as the US. It's not clear how that would all shake out in the more medium and long term, and I don't realistically think we will see that. anytime soon. But it's interesting that it is even being thought about and discussed. And make no mistake, as Balaji rightly outlines, Bitcoin is rapidly rising versus gold. The number of gold bars, for example, that, a Bitcoin can buy or whatever, has been increasing over time. And that is amidst gold also doing quite well. By the way, I think some physical gold is very interesting as a kind of self-sovereign asset. And interesting, amidst all this kind of speculation within the community, we just this week had Fed Chairman Jay Powell refer to Bitcoin as digital gold and state that Bitcoin is not a competitor to the dollar, but is a competitor to gold. Now, in isolation, I don't think that's all that interesting or telling, but then you also simultaneously had the Treasury Department. So again, these are, in theory, these independent entities, although in recent years we've seen them act more and more in collaboration with each other. They too are referring to Bitcoin as this sort of digital gold. Again, remains to be seen, but that is interesting and perhaps not a coincidence. And furthermore, I don't necessarily think it's going to be the US with Bitcoin versus the BRICS with gold. It's pretty clear that the BRICS also understand what's happening. For example, in China, a Shanghai court ruled that Bitcoin is legal property. And so if there was any doubt of ownership in mainland China, that has arguably now been alleviated. Keep in mind, China tried to ban all of this just a few short years ago. Morocco, another example of a country that had banned Bitcoin back in 2017 that has now reversed that as well. You have Swiss lawmaker Samuel Coleman calling for Switzerland to create a strategic reserve before the US and BRICS do it. So again, very similar, right? At the corporate level, you had MicroStrategy back in 2020 do this big thing, and then everyone thought, oh, it's just going to rapidly happen. Everyone's going to copy them. It takes time. In a similar way, El Salvador did their thing a number of years ago. Now, finally, you're seeing that trend continue. It also helps that Nayib Bukele is, publicly posting their Bitcoin gains. So I think if you removed all of the nation state level stuff and you just had the kind of corporate level and the institutional level and individuals, just that alone is enough for a massive, massive 2025 and remainder of this current bull cycle. And who knows if this cycle will even look like past cycles. Maybe it's the proverbial super cycle. Who knows? But my point is that that's not the case. We do have some real discussion at the nation state level. And if anything happens there of any kind, all bets are off. Interestingly, you have David Sachs, who has been officially tapped as Trump's crypto and AI czar. Now, David is perhaps most well known through the All In podcast, where a lot of you that, watch this channel, maybe you've seen it, maybe you haven't, or maybe you've seen some of the little clips on Twitter that go around of these kind of VC guys that are talking about dumping on retail and stuff. And you may very well have a sour taste in your mouth around that group, but we should not forget that David Sachs has been a massive advocate of Bitcoin since 2013. Not just an advocate, but also has demonstrated a deep understanding of Bitcoin and its potential, even to the point of separating money from state. And David's VC firm, Craft Ventures, was one of the investors for Lightning Labs, Fold, some of the most well-known Bitcoin companies. So don't fade that either, right? If Trump is going to have David in his ear talking about some of this, right? I think the likelihood of this happening is still in absolute terms probably pretty low, but those odds I think are increasing before our very eyes. And even if we remove the sort of political nation state game theory of outright buying Bitcoin and kind of competing to see who can acquire the most Bitcoin, you're definitely already seeing softer versions of that game theory in terms of advantageous tax treatment. For example, the Czech Republic just came out and basically said that, hey, if you've held Bitcoin for longer than 3 years, there's no capital gains. We're also removing the requirement to report certain transactions below a certain size across the course of a year, different things like that. So many countries are going to see this opportunity to become the next Singapore, become the next UAE by attracting capital, by relaxing these capital gains tax laws, for example. Okay, so I will let you do your own interpretation of all those different data points. And I think what's arguably even more impressive is that all of this price action has happened amidst a worsening global liquidity profile. As Jamie points out here, a lot of the different liquidity factors, so central bank balance sheets, global money supply even, again, in the short term, have all been rather bearish because, as we can see in this chart, it's a well-established relationship between Bitcoin, which you can see in the orange there on the right-hand side of this chart, versus this kind of GMI total liquidity index, and that's on a 12-week lead. So said another way, Bitcoin tends to follow liquidity, and because the dollar has strengthened, particularly leading into and following the US election, with Trump talking about tariffs and all these things that would limit dollars getting out of the US and therefore make dollars more sort of precious, right? That's why we've seen the upward pressure on the dollar, strengthening of the dollar versus other fiat currencies. That tightening is what has caused this tightening in overall liquidity. So when we ask the question, like, where might we go from here? Again, I have never been one for predicting price other than up and to the right over a sufficiently long period of time. Perhaps we do see a pullback maybe in January, February timing if that dollar strength continues and if that liquidity environment continues. However, make no mistake, the world needs a weaker dollar. You're already seeing some pressure in certain countries because they're selling assets and different things to protect their own currencies from getting too weak. So the world needs a weaker dollar, make no mistake. There may be some turbulence on the way to that final realization. And so again, like every cycle, if this is kind of your first cycle, we typically see, multiple 30+% dips in price on the way to, the ultimate kind of all-time high for the cycle. And I'll be really honest, right? This is, my third cycle at this point. I have not seen dips get bought up quite like this. It just seems like there's a constant bid under the price. That's not to say we won't see bigger corrections on our way higher. I'm just sort of anecdotally sharing that. And keep in mind, like, there's a powerful psychological piece here as well, where some of the more institutional investors are going to view anything below 100K as being cheap. And that's particularly reinforced. You see things like Bloomberg Terminal, which are now reporting, 0.1 million in the axis, right, for Bitcoin's price. So I think there's a big psychological point there. And just historically speaking, as we can see from these couple of charts, like, we're just not close to a top yet. Historically speaking, in terms of the cycle in relation to the halving, and again, I've talked about that on this channel quite a bit, like, we are just getting started. We're in the very, very early innings. Historically speaking, we would expect a cycle top sometime in the back half of 2025. Other metrics like the Puel multiple that have been historically quite reliable predictors of cycle tops. As we can see, that's, quite far from a cycle top based on where we currently are. I kind of like this view from Jordi Visser, who's basically putting Bitcoin versus the Magnificent Seven, so some of the kind of best performing stocks. And as he's showing, historically, Bitcoin tends to absolutely rip against that. So again, by all of those metrics, we're kind of nowhere close to the cycle top. And I will tell you, retail is not here. They are nowhere close. They are completely asleep. I can see that in my own channel statistics. In past occurrences where retail really starts to get in, I see my channel statistics, view counts, things like that, going parabolic, and we are not there yet. So I think we have a long way to go. And one of the other things that I think will be pretty interesting in terms of shaping people's perceptions about this is what is increasingly starting to come out with this Operation Choke Point 2.0. If you go back to some of my earlier videos this year, you'll see me covering this in a good amount of detail, but it's basically about how the Biden administration, in a very authoritarian way, basically went after a whole industry. And at the time that it happened, it was sort of, rumors, blah, blah, blah. But we now have a lot of revelations and evidence that say, like, this happened. Surprise, surprise, right? They tried to kill the Bitcoin and broader crypto industry here in the US via the banking system, via severing the industry from the banking system. And I think there's going to be a lot of ugly stuff that comes out, similar to all the revelations with the pandemic, right? And how governments really took the mask off and showed us their true colors. And I think that's going to be yet another switch that flips for people to be like, wait, this whole system is rotten to its core. I need something that is outside this system. So who knows? Price predictions for 2025, I don't know. I think we go a lot higher from here. Maybe double, maybe a little bit less, maybe a whole lot more. We have the mimetic target of the market cap of gold. That would place Bitcoin at about 850K. Again, I don't know that we get there unless we see some of the nation state level stuff, but buckle up because I think we're very much in uncharted territory. And so all the historical cycle analysis, while I'm a huge adherent to that, and that's why all my predictions this year have so far been, pretty correct, I think we're now officially in uncharted territory, and so it's anyone's guess. The takeaway is, and I don't want to be like, you're running out of time. I'm going to stack sats for the rest of my days, but at the end of the day, it's up to you, right? Make your own judgment for you and your family. Like, are you at the Bitcoin position you want to be at on the cusp of what I think is going to just be a crazy period of number go up? Maybe we'll have a big sell-off, sometime in 2026 that allows people to buy back in at 60, 70, 80K, maybe, but none of that's guaranteed. So that's one thing to think about. The other thing to think about is, okay, great, number go up, purchasing power is important, we should celebrate this for sure. But in terms of Bitcoin being this truly peer-to-peer monetary system, as I covered in a recent video around Bitcoin consensus, we're still a ways off from being able to have billions of people using Bitcoin in a self-custodial fashion. The tech that exists today simply will not support that. And yes, that's even with the Lightning Network. Okay, that's the reality. So there is still a large battle to be fought here, I think at least, in terms of avoiding a future state where it's just like, hey, Bitcoin is this sort of like investment asset that is kind of fully within these big custodians. And while it's a very good thing that Bitcoin is not a proof of stake network, can you possibly imagine how horrible that would be? How much Ethereum shot itself by switching to proof of stake? What a disastrous call. There definitely are still risks associated with that. Big custodians perhaps funding particular forks of Bitcoin, right? I don't think we're going to see some of this stuff in the near term. But it's nonetheless important to perhaps separate out this kind of number go up dynamic, as well as like, is Bitcoin reaching its potential in terms of separating money from state? And I think we have a long way to go there. So be sure you're subscribed because I'm going to be covering in the next couple of videos some of the promising upgrade proposals that would go towards just that goal that we just articulated. But in any case, as sort of parting wisdom, I think Hunter here articulates it really well. If you own Bitcoin, you've got a lot of people working for you, tens of millions of people introducing friends and colleagues to it, educating, hundreds of companies building integration services, access capabilities, right? You have core developers, all of that work to advance the asset you own. It's nice to be an owner. And that goes for me in my little, tiny way of contributing to this huge thing. Every video I make that inspires one of you to inspire someone else, right? Like, we are all part of this chain. And I just think that in many ways that is unstoppable when you really think about it. And when you think about just the sheer number of people that are dedicating their entire life force and energy to advancing this thing. But when we say advance, I think it's important to be really clear about what we mean. Pure number go up is one thing, but enabling Bitcoin to fulfill its potential is another thing entirely. And so I hope you will join me on the journey towards both of those goals. But I hope you found this valuable and insightful. If you did, you already know what to do. Give this video a like. Use the share feature underneath this video. That really does help get this to a broader audience. And if you're so enamored with this content, you want to donate to a pleb, which really does help me continue to make these videos, you can do so in a number of ways. There's the YouTube Super Thanks feature built directly into YouTube. Or, my preference, you can zip some sats my way on the Lightning Network to my Lightning address, ragermajor@getalby.com. And for those of you that want to get in touch with me, I'm now working with a number of clients one-on-one on all sorts of topics, from leveling up your game on self-custody, setting up a multi-sig, running your own Bitcoin node, Bitcoin privacy best practices, and more, you can reach out to me at vita.io/Ian Major. But for now, we'll go ahead and leave things here. What an exciting 2024 it has been, and I think 2025 is going to be even more so. Until next time, my friends, I'll see you then.